asking her questions in English. We're going to have a bit of a conversation between the two of us first, and then I will open it up and go to the audience. You can either ask a question here in the room, or you can go on the GlobeSec app or the Slido website to submit your question. So, Natallia, I would just maybe start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your husband, how he was detained, why he was detained, what was the work that led to this latest imprisonment in Belarus.
Regarding the imprisonment of my husband, Ales Byalyatski, he was imprisoned in the year 2021, 14th of July, because of, at the beginning, it was for organizing massive unrest and not paying taxes. But obviously, during the process of they considered that he will not receive a huge sentence, so they wanted to requalify his judgment for carrying and counterfeiting to Belarus. And this day, Ales is not present in Minsk. 1 month ago, he went to a prison colony in Gorky Mogilov region in the eastern Belarus, and for a long period of time, around a month or so, we did not receive any letter from them. A few days ago, I received a letter from him, so I cannot say directly where he is at the moment, and for what, and why he was jailed. Of course, not for what he was sentenced for, that is tax evasion and so on, but for human rights defense that he did over the course of a really long period of time, for beginning of 1996, when he founded Vesna Civil Rights Center, until his last days of freedom.
I'm glad you highlighted the communications challenges you've had, because at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, where I'm president, we have two of our journalists, Ihar Losik, Andrei Kuznechik, who are currently detained in Belarus. And the disturbing trend, as you noted, is that a lot of political prisoners are increasingly being isolated, kept from even basic communications with the outside world, which is something that doesn't get a lot of attention. I'm curious, because actually I just heard earlier today, I heard that the work of Ales's organization continues even while he's in detention. So can you say a little bit more about the work of the Human Rights Center, Vyazna? What is that organization doing even now that he is in prison? What role is it playing in supporting Belarus during this period?
Regarding the letters and isolation, it's a form of torture that is used in many cases where they limit the amount of information that is provided to them, to prisoners, and limitations in this way are severe. And regarding Ales, he is absolutely isolated from contact with anyone. He can only receive letters from me, and even that, not on a regular basis. And I cannot receive the same letters from him too. Quite often they get lost, like 2, 3, 5 of them get lost, and they get lost from the chain of our communication, because they try to do everything to make him feel isolated, and that he has no support on the outside. And regarding the activities of the human rights organization Vesna, you have to understand the current situation in Belarus. The civil society is practically defeated and destroyed. All organizations were closed down, shut down, and they were forced to move their activities to other countries, and we were no exception. That is Vesna. And in this day, the headquarters of Vesna are in Vilnius, Lithuania, but we have representatives in Poland, for example. But in general, our center continues in its work. We monitor a situation regarding human rights in Belarus, and we do everything possible to spread awareness to international community, and they try to push towards changes that would make the situation easier for those who are imprisoned in Belarus, because, well, you can compare this to burned fields in Belarus. That is, there are no representatives of civil organizations, no volunteer activity. It's practically forbidden, and it went into illegal fields. And to provide help to anyone in Belarus is really, really difficult. But the society in the West should know about the atrocities and total terror that happens on a daily basis in Belarus. And this information is being spread by Vesna too.
You mentioned the terror that's going on against the Belarusian people. Can you talk a little bit more about what life is like for average Belarusians today? Because I think the challenge, we're bombarded by horror stories about the situation in Russia, obviously, about the plight of the Ukrainian people under attack. But Belarus often escapes notice at this point in terms of people actually understanding the censorship, the complete governmental control. And so talk a little bit more about the limitations on Belarusian people, what they, as they try to go about and live their lives, seek out independent information, share information with each other, the tactics that the regime is using to silence any dissent.
Yes, regarding a situation and the current situation in Belarus, it's total terror, and we understand how difficult the situation is in Ukraine, where there's an open military conflict, and in general, for the whole world, Belarus has become like hidden, and it's hard to understand what situation is in Belarus and how people live there. But I think all of you remember what happened in the year 2020 during the presidential elections, when people of Belarus went to their squares, villages and towns, and they went out to protest, and millions of them protested against the Lukashenko's regime. And by this, Belarus has shown its decision, its European course. And it's of course obvious that the government did not want to share its competencies, and as much as possible they suppressed the first peaceful protest in 2020. After that, Belarus went a bit down under the radar of the Western media. And what happens in this moment? Well, I have to say that repressions in the year 2021, 2022 and 2023, well, they continue, and they continue in huge scale. You have to imagine that the country has 9 million citizens, and every single day they arrest 10 or 20 people. That's a huge number, practically, huge scale. So, in general, Belarusians live in constant fear, because the fear is being cultivated by the government in order to punish, because Lukashenko has his vengeance against the whole nation, because they went outside of their comfort zone and fight against him. And another thing, a reason why he does that, is he wants to make silent all of those who are against him. They, of course, jail people for everything, even for liking different posts on social media. And this in Belarus is a reason for arresting someone, and this includes everyone. And because of that, Belarus has returned to Stalin's repressions, when every single person lives in fear and tries to interpret things what they hear. Let's say steps on staircase. Are they coming for me or for my neighbor? Lukashenko did everything not to make Belarus become a nation of prisoners, so everyone would be in prison. So the fear is present, and the fear is there. The thing is, Belarusians did not make peace with this, because there are constant jailings, and it shows that the government is afraid of its people, and it can keep its power only by doing this.
I think in the Nobel Peace Prize address that when you accepted the award on behalf of your husband, you quoted some of his writings where he said, I quote, "All of Belarus is a prison," which you just described. And I just add, based on our work at Radio Free Europe, it is one of the toughest operating environments right now for journalists. The extreme censorship even extends to individuals who are consuming information, which is pretty rare in terms of countries actually going after citizens for just visiting a website, seeking out truthful information. We've had accounts of some of our audience members actually serving prison time after our websites were discovered on their cell phones. And so it's really about as close to complete repression as you can get in this modern environment. I guess, what is your main request for the outside world? We talked a little bit about how the attention has shifted away from Belarus. When you're out there making the case for people to pay attention to the plight of your husband and other political prisoners, what are you asking from democratic countries in Europe and the US? What would you like to see the international community do?
Regarding repressions and why they jail people, yes, you have to pay attention to the fact that even the information that is published on the internet, when the police finds it on the on mobile phone of a citizen, it will become a reason for arrest and torture. So having access to free information in Belarus, even via internet, is quite a risk for them, and it's a huge risk. But at the same time, while the internet still exists, there are alternative possibilities to receive information, and it's obvious that avoiding certain bans on sites, the Belarusians do this. Just like during the Soviet times, they when they tried to listen to Radio Free Europe on their radios, they always tried to find this information and receive it, so they would understand the current situation, to understand, as what you have mentioned, that the Western world did not forget about Belarus and people of Belarus. And in this regards, yes, for me it's really important to pay attention and to make people pay attention to what happens to Belarusians. They need help. They need constant help, not only on individual basis, from certain organizations. This includes also Belarusian organizations, but also we need help from international organizations, and we need to support, first of all, continuing on what we discussed, we need to support independent media. Obviously, at this moment, they had to move their activities to other countries because of the fact that repressions touched even journalists themselves. At the moment, 33 journalists are imprisoned in Lukashenko's prisons because of that. Support and help for Belarusian media, especially those in Belarusian language, because they spread the important content for Belarusians that is important for them, so we need support for that. It's also really important to support all sorts of cultural and learning projects. And why is that? Because Lukashenko at this moment actively started Russification of Belarus and practically destroys the national identity. And in this regard, it's really important to do certain activities that would not allow to destroy everything that is Belarusian, and that would save it, at least in other countries. So when in the future, when we'll have perspectives for development of Belarus, so we could make that work, and make that work for the benefit of Belarusian nation and people. And what's also really important, it's important that the politicians and nations, countries, would have a policy based on principles in terms of Belarus, so they would not provide possibilities to avoid, let's say, economical ways to support. As I have mentioned, they have to provide independent media. They have to support individual organizations and individuals themselves. And I have to say that for people in general in Belarus, for us to receive help, the thing is practically impossible. I'll repeat myself, because those who could do this are currently jailed, imprisoned, or they are in other countries. So we have to try to find other methods of help. The help is really important for us. They need it because those people who spend some time being arrested, they at the moment cannot find a job. And when they fire someone, because at the moment in Belarus they fire people for their civil position, and to find other job, you have to provide a resume from your last job position. So it's impossible to provide such a resume, CV, and people then become in harsh, difficult economical positions where they cannot feed their own family. And in this regard, I'll repeat myself in saying that the position of individual politicians, countries, organizations in the West has to wholeheartedly support Belarus and people of Belarus, and we use all tools that would make Belarusian dictatorship regime weaker, and this would bring closer the victory. And the victory in Ukraine also will bring closer the victory in Belarus.
You described the long-running efforts even before the full-scale invasion, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Lukashenko regime to Russify Belarus, to extinguish the Belarusian language, which I think is important for people to understand, that the mere act of speaking Belarusian, of broadcasting information in Belarusian, that has long been a political act. An act of opposition almost to the regime. And so we've had that challenge for a long time in Belarus. But now, more recently, you have Lukashenko pulling the country into the war, allowing the basing of Russian troops, the operations into Ukraine from Belarus, carrying out missile strikes, air raids from Belarusian territory, and then just in recent days, talk of basing nuclear weapons on Belarusian soil. And in the Nobel Peace Prize lecture, you referenced this as the loss of Belarus's statehood and independence. And I'm curious what you think the response is of the Belarusian people to these actions. How much of a debate has that provoked, as far as you and groups like Vyazna can determine? Is there resistance to Belarus's full-scale participation in the invasion of its neighbor Ukraine? or has society just gone along with this? What's your view on that?
Что касается союзников Беларуси, Лукашенко,
Lukashenko's being an ally in the war against Ukraine, well, he makes possible for Russians to use our territory for rocket attacks, and for that I'm deeply ashamed that this is done in my country as a Belarusian, and my representatives are behaving like this. But it has to be said that before that, Lukashenko did not, to this day has not used his troops in the war against Ukraine. And why is that? Let's not forget the fact that he has experience of the year 2020, and it was deeply traumatic for him, and he understands that providing weapons to the nation that is not supporting him, that's quite dangerous for him himself, because those weapons could be turned against him. And also there are certain troubles and fears are related to the fact that despite the fact that the country is being a totalitarian dictatorship and it punishes all attempts, and all resistance moves to a legal field practically. And you remember at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, 3 young people, they burned down transformation booth and railroad, and by this they managed to stop railroad cars from Russia. They were carrying military equipment, so they helped Ukrainians to defend themselves and coordinate the situation. Well, they were very cruel with them. They shot through one of those men's leg, and the rest of them received a sentence for many years. And regarding the military and war topic, it has to be said that, let's say, about military and nuclear warheads that are supposed to be put in place in Belarus because of Lukashenko. Let's not be delusional about those things, because this is all done by Russia. Remember that Lukashenko, of course, would love to have such nuclear warheads on his territory, but this is all dictated by Russia, and this is done with his agreement, and because of that they all make all preparations and support for placing nuclear warheads there. The Western world, and even for the Western world, this has to be a serious signal, an important signal too, because this makes danger, creates danger not just for Belarus in terms of receiving a retaliation attack in the case of use of such nuclear warheads, but it also brings closer nuclear danger to the Western borders. And because of that, everything that is done in Belarus during this time should be perceived in a serious manner by the West. And regarding the possible discussion in the Belarusian society regarding the war in Ukraine and, let's say, use of nuclear missiles, we have to understand that Belarus is not Russia. Belarus does not have any ambitions in terms of imperialism like Russia, who is ready to spread its influence and invade foreign territories, like with the example right now in Ukraine. And because of that, Belarusian people cannot support war, and they are against the war from the very beginning. And also, What's also important and what has to be said in terms of the nuclear missiles, Belarusian and people of Belarus, without any limitations, they are deeply against placement of any nuclear warheads because of a simple reason. Let's not forget that some time ago we survived, of course, the Chernobyl problem, and this stays in deep memory of all Belarusians, and they remember that placement of nuclear warheads may cause danger for themselves, and this is unpleasant for them, of course.
We have one question online, which I'll ask in a minute, but I want to give, in the last few minutes, others in the audience here, if you have questions, the chance. We can collect maybe two, if there are questions behind me here. You get a mic right there.
Я буду по-русски, я надеюсь, переводчик. Наталья, я хочу начать с того, что я горжусь вами и вашим супругом. Вы истинные герои нашей нации. Спасибо за то, что вы являетесь голосом, да, не только Светланы Тихановской, но и вы.
It's not just Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, but there's also you. I'm not sure if the audience knows, but the husband of Natalia fought for human rights even during the Soviet Union, and he continues to do so. Even when being in jail. So thank you. I wish you strength. But my question is this: in Belarusian society, there's right now a discussion which is quite huge about what's necessary to do to free political prisoners. Among political oppositions, there are some groups which say that Western countries have to go and make dialogue and make concessions for Belarus. I'd like to hear your opinion about that. Thank you for the question regarding the discussion in Belarusian society and political prisoners. There's a huge group of people which is imprisoned. Those are the people who picked freedom of Belarus, and who dared to speak openly in Belarus. And those people, there's a lot of them. A lot of them are imprisoned, around 5,000, and 5 or 6,000. Those numbers are provided also by Vyasna group. So it's important to understand those numbers of the amount of people who are in the jail at the moment, and also of those who went through different jails. This is a huge number. People are being tortured, and they take their health. They practically torture them to the point of them losing limbs and so on. And at the moment, the most important thing in discussion in Belarusian society is how to free people from Lukashenko's prisons. And it has to be said that this question was raised also by Ales when he has his last words during the court hearing. He said about the future reconciliation that should happen in Belarus, but he draws attention to the fact that this future reconciliation and discussion with the other parties, let's not call them just Lukashenko's, it has to be based on the fact that all political prisoners will be freed from prisons, and this step should give open discussion between those who wants and works actively for changes in Belarus and who wants to change the situation of political prisoners, and because of that to offer the governments any steps back. That's impossible. It's not serious, because we know that Lukashenko will lie to you. The first thing is to free the political prisoners and then future discussions about how to build our future.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time and we're up against lunch, but I believe everyone in the audience will agree with the questioner that we wish you, Natallia, continued courage and are amazed by your bravery and support of Belarus and in support of your husband. So please join me in thanking Natallia for talking to us today.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Organizers have asked me to flag that everyone is now invited for a lunch break, and the panels will continue here on the Maria Theresa stage at 1400 with the next panel entitled Ukraine and Taiwan, Why Global Unity Matters. So enjoy your lunch.